Hi all. Today in this video we're going to explore the Sicilian Najdorf with bishop to g5, the very sharp line. Let's take a look and explore here. So e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, c takes, knight f6, knight c3, a6, and now bishop to g5. The idea behind bishop to g5 is to prevent an e7 to e5 thrust for black. Later on, I'm going to make a Najdorf basics video that will talk more about this stuff in the early stage in the Najdorf. But for now, we're just going to jump into a line I would recommend against bishop g5 and essentially look at bishop g5 lines in general. So e6, and after f4, black has a lot of moves. Bishop e7, h6, which is what I'm going to suggest. Also knight bd7, knight c6, queen c7, queen b6, the dreaded poison pawn, and b5, which is another very interesting line and very sharp. Okay, h6 is going to be my recommendation. And what's the idea? The idea is to get a delayed version of the poison pawn. What's the difference exactly? Well, after this line, the bishop is still on g5, right? This means that white's bishop here is a little more solid and less awkward. Also, theory has shown that this line is just too drawish. And it takes a lot of memorization. I do not suggest this unless you are playing for draw and correspondence. Here I'm talking about over-the-board advice, okay? So h6, bishop h4, and queen b6. This essentially gives you a less drawish and a less drawish version of the poison pawn and more of a fight. Okay, and here at this point, white has many different branches that we have to cover. Actually, first, let's talk about what happens after bishop takes f6. Okay, this line is not so good for white. Black should play queen takes f6, queen d2, knight c6, knight takes, b takes, and now black's schematic here is to go queen back to d8 to keep the queen safe. Then bishop e7, d5, castle, bishop b7, and rook to b8 in some cases. All these moves do not have to be played in any particular order, though it is always good to play bishop e7 first before you thrust with d5 to keep the d8 square more defended. Here's an example. So castle queenside, queen d8, bishop c4, bishop e7, h4, d5, bishop b3, bishop b7, king b1, castle, g3, kind of a passive move, and now queen c7. Black has a bishop pair, so black wants to open the position and put rooks on d8 and b8 and play for c5 and c4 thrust. This is very, very healthy for black and gives black little to no problems. Let's go back. So this is what happens if white takes on f6 and why it's not such a great move. Essentially giving up the bishop pair and also a dull version of the king side attack that white aspired to get. Okay, bishop h4. Queen b6, my recommendation here. You could also go bishop e7 and queen c7. So, okay, he has queen d2 and a3. First, I would like to talk about this a3 move because it is more the sideline-ish line and also quiet main line-ish. It's just an important line to know. Basically, what you need to know, first of all, is do not take on b2. This is horrible. The queen gets trapped on b2, and it's over. Instead, you need to play bishop e7, and now bishop f2, queen c7, queen f3, and now black has a choice between b5 and knight d7. I'm going to suggest b5 to keep the b8 knight flexible and not define where its position's going to be at. Knight bd7 is actually more popular, but leads to more familiar territory for white. If you are interested in this line, then you need to research the game Anish Giri versus Maxime Vacher-Lagrave from Norway Chess 4th in 2016. But I wouldn't play this for black. Okay, so b5, castle. Okay, e5 is harmless. This gives nothing to white. Just d takes here, f takes, knight fd7, queen takes, queen takes, queen takes, and knight takes e5 with a small advantage. Black's idea is to play knight d7, castle queenside, and play rook to g8. Let's go back. Other moves. g4. Well, this forces black to decide what to do with the flexible b8 knight. But after knight to b7, knight b to d7, this just transposes into the main lines. What you need to know is do not do bishop to b7 because this weakens the e6 square too much. For example, after g5, h takes, knight h5, white has a very important idea. g6! Exclam. This is a very common motif that black has to watch out for, and by playing bishop b7, you neglect control of the light squares on e6 and f7. And anyway, this position is just basically lost for black, especially in correspondence. So, okay, after b5, castle queenside, bishop b7 is okay now because he hadn't played g4 immediately. Okay, g4, and now knight c6, reaching the same position as from Alexander Grischuk versus Maxime Vacher-Lagrave in London 2015. If you want more references, you should check out this game as well to learn more plans. Okay, g5, white needs to react quickly, but black needs to take the threat of g5 to g6 again very seriously, because this can cause a lot of damage to the light squares. What else? Okay, if h4, then d5. This is an important idea for black in this position. This equalizes already. For example, after e5, I will do knight e4. It's forced. Knight takes, d takes, queen c3, and rook c8. This is equal, and black will just castle and be fine. If e takes d5, then you have knight takes d4, bishop takes, knight takes, bishop g7, knight c3, queen c3, and queen c3. Also let's go back. Sorry about that. Also, queen takes f4 here is okay if you want to keep queens on the board. Alternatively, you can take on c3, and after bishop takes, bishop takes, bishop takes, bishop f3, all these moves are essentially forced. Rook d2, bishop g4, bishop g2, and rook d8. This is equality for black. I would recommend playing this endgame against a partner and to try to win for black. Let's go back. So not h4. By the way, if king b1, then you play the exact same moves for black. You play d5, equalizing, and all the same moves I showed you. It's pretty much no difference. Okay, let's check out what happens after g5. White needs to react quickly again because d5 is coming quick. Okay, so h takes g5, f takes, and now black has a slight problem related to the g6 thrust. Therefore, knight e5 is forced to keep control of the g6 square with tempo. White will do queen g2, renewing the threat of g6. And now black has to play knight fg4, neutralizing g6. Um, Also, black is going to play knight takes f2 and have a really good game with the bishop pair. g6 is going to be played anyway, and now I would play bishop g5. The idea is to open the queen up to defend f7. After king b1, knight takes, queen takes, and knight takes g6, black has strong control of the dark squares, but white has things that black needs to watch out for. Bishop takes b5. Bam! Okay, pause the video and think about how black should respond to this. Okay, the only good move is king e7. If a takes b5, then knight takes e6 is immediately winning. After f takes e6, knight takes b5, queen c6, knight takes d6 check, king d8, queen f7 exclam, knight e7, queen g7, rook g8, and now queen e5. Black's king is naked, and also this position's dead loss for black due to white's strong attack. I advise to try to play black against a computer here and to try to hold as long as you can to get some ideas as to how white should attack. After king e7 and bishop a4, black has the bishop pair and some weaknesses to attack on e4 and h2. Black's king may look exposed on e7, but it is actually quite safe with all the pieces near it to defend it, especially that pawn on f7 which survived and keeps e6 defended. Black has, in this position, a small advantage. That pretty much sums up everything you need to know for this a3 line. Next, let's talk about queen to d2. Now this is reaching poison pawn territory. Here I will suggest queen takes b2, rook b1, queen a3, and now white reaches some crossroads from here. White has a choice between e5, f5, and bishop takes f6, all of which are equal, but black is very solid and healthy in all three of these moves. And also, white has no real way to force a perpetual, so I would still play these lines for black. I'm fine with it because there is no way to force a dead draw, unlike in the traditional poison pawn. First, let's look at bishop takes f6. Okay, I will do g takes. Who wouldn't? Bishop e2, with the idea of possibly controlling the light squares on h5. And now knight c6. Okay, in this position, black can also do h5, transposing into a mainline position in the poison pawn. But after knight c6, black has slightly better prospects. Knight takes, b takes, and castle. In the Beijing Sport Accord Blitz event, Maxime Vacher-Lagrave here chose bishop to g7 against Alexander Grischuk, but it's not so clear that the bishop belongs here, although he did win for black. Queen a5, after rook b3, queen c5 check, king h1. Actually, by the way, Vacher-Lagrave played queen a5 here, but it is actually technically losing after queen d6. But after queen c5 here and king h1, after this improvement, this position is reasonable for black, though it is very hard for both sides to evaluate all the different possible plans in this position. Typically speaking, black wants to strike for d5, or alternatively f5. Instead of bishop to g7, I will recommend queen a5, king h1, bishop e7. I think this is where the bishop really belongs. Rook b3, and now h5 with the idea in the future to go h4. Extremely double-edged. The black king has nowhere great to go other than on f8 to stay in the center, which is black's strongest part of the board and the safest part. Nonetheless, I think this is a very healthy position for black, And if we check engine, it says black has a slight edge, about -0.2. After f5, bishop d7, and something like f takes e6, you should simply play f takes e6. You have massive control over the center squares, and black is going to do queen to g5, holding on to a lot of important squares around the king. That's all you really need to know about if white does bishop takes f6. Okay, next, let's look at e5. Okay, after here, d takes e5 is a requirement. If you do knight to d7, this is a mistake after bishop to e2 exclam. This scores around plus 1.5 for white, and the idea is white is threatening a knight takes e6. For example, after the blunder d takes e5, white should play knight takes e6, and if f takes, then bishop h5, g6, and bishop takes g6, checkmate. In this position, white should do g5, but it is really bad for black and very uncomfortable. So d takes e5, f takes e5, knight f d7. Also g5 can be played, but it is a lot more drawish. Knight f d7, knight e4, queen takes a2. Black has hoarded a bunch of pawns, or he will, but white has extremely active play, and black is more likely to lose unless he can defend and consolidate. If you want to train hard holding hard positions, then I recommend you to check out Practical Chess Defense by Jacob Agard. It is a great book with defensive, tactical, and calculation-oriented exercises. Rook d1, queen to d5, queen e3, queen takes e5, c3, and bishop to c5. Very often in these positions, what you need to know is black will reach an imbalanced material type position, where black will have to end up trading a queen for a rook and a minor piece, or sometimes directly trading a queen for a rook, but with many extra pawns. This topic of chess of imbalanced material and of playing with a queen versus a rook and a minor will be an essential skill to master at some point in your career. Bishop g3, queen d5, bishop d6. Not all of these moves are forced. This is just a sample continuation of some ideas you need to know. Bishop takes, knight b5, and now queen takes d1. This is what I'm talking about, the imbalanced material. After king takes d1, bishop e5, and knight check, and king e7, and knight c4. In this position, white traded a rook for a queen, but black has a ton of pawns and very unclear position. Very good chances for both sides. And here ends theory of e5 in my notes. Let's go back. Next, f5. Okay, the idea is to go f takes e6 and bishop c4. Here, black should ignore and play bishop e7. Also, knight c6 might be a better way to avoid drawish chances, but it's a lot harder to play and still equal anyway. It is worth knowing, however, in case you ever need to mix your repertoire. Bishop e7, f takes, bishop c4, knight takes e4, knight takes, and now bishop takes g3, bishop g5, knight takes, h takes, and now there is a choice between bishop takes e6 and castling kingside. First, let's look at bishop takes. Pause the video and see if you can find black's best idea in this position. The best idea is queen takes g3 exclam. the idea is after h takes, you're going to win the queen back with rook takes, king f2, rook h2. Do not take the rook on b1, that's horrible. Do rook h2, king e3, rook takes d2, king takes, bishop e6, knight takes, and now king to d7 and knight takes g5, king c6, knight e6, and g6. Black had several ways to play this. For example, he didn't need to play king c6 actually. He could have played b5 immediately. But point is that I'm trying to bring up is Black should play here, strive for b5 and knight d7, knight b6, and knight c4. This is a one thematic plan you should know in this endgame. And the idea, essentially, with knight going to c4 is to utilize the c4 square that white has no control over. I would recommend you practice these endgames with a partner. This is all you really need to know for if bishop takes e6. Okay, now castle. Black should do queen c5. This is the only move actually, but it is sufficient. The idea is to threaten essentially e5, winning the knight. White's only good reply really is queen f2. And after knight c6, knight takes, queen takes, rook takes, bishop takes, rook b8. Excuse me, hiccups. Bishop d5, knight e5, bishop b7, king e7, rook b3, for example, and a5. This is one equalizing path for black, and can potentially lead to a knight versus bishop ending. So something could happen, but this is pretty equal. Instead of knight to c6 for black, you could also try e5, an interesting try to make black slip up. Basically, the point is queen f7 is a huge blunder, because after king d8, the d4 knight is just completely lost because of e takes d4 coming. Instead, white should play bishop f7 check, and after king d7, bishop e6, king d8, bishop takes, king takes, knight e6, queen takes f2, rook takes, knight d7. This is probably objectively equal, but a little more comfortable for white. Another fine move is knight f5. Okay, this sums up all the important lines for black and for white, all the main lines that you should know. Basically, white is not obliged to play, queen to d2 or a3. He can try other moves instead. Basically, any move that white plays, if you are given the opportunity, you should basically take the pawn on b2. But you also have to calculate whether your queen gets trapped or not, essentially. I think that pretty much covers everything that you need to know. Yeah, just to quickly review. So e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, take, knight f6, knight c3, a6, bishop g5, e6, f4, h6, my recommendation. If you take, then this is bad for white because black gets a lot of central control, and white gets a bad attack here, right? And after bishop h4, sorry that I'm going kind of fast, this is just to review some lines. After queen b6, queen to d2, you should take and play poison pawn style and do homework for what happens for all these three different crossroads. And if a3 instead of queen to d2, then you should not take because that traps the queen, and instead play for this other line with b5. I recommend you can also look at knight bd7, and after b5 essentially play to secure control of the light squares. Okay, that's about it for this video. pretty much sums up everything I have to say. If you have any questions or comments or concerns, then please comment on the video. I would be happy to read. Hope you enjoyed and hope you learned a lot. Take care.